Happening now, we want to welcome our viewers from across the United States and around the world. This is the EdTech Situation Room. Good morning, good day, good evening. My name is Jason Neiffer. I am the co-host of the EdTech Situation Room, and this is episode 83 for Wednesday, January 24th, 2018. I am the Assistant Director and Curriculum Director of the Montana Digital Academy, the state virtual school located on the University of Montana campus in fabulous Missoula, Montana. And today, I started a temporary gig as a part-time adjunct faculty teaching the EdTech Methods course at the University of Montana for pre-service teachers, along with my partner in crime, Mike Costinelli. So interesting times going on in Missoula. And tonight, joining me, as always, from Oklahoma City, good evening, Wes Fryer.
Good evening, Jason. I'm just being a little bit more casual here tonight, but hopefully most of our folks are listening to the show and not, having to look at our mugs. If you're going to turn in live, though, we definitely encourage you to check out our chat room. And I am the Director of Technology at the Cassidy School, and we've got probably just as lengthy a list of articles. I was listening to a podcast I really liked, The Committed, and they were describing January as a black hole of news, perhaps because they focus primarily on Apple stuff. So since we talk about all kinds of tech stuff, we have no shortage of topics to discuss tonight. So we encourage you to check out our links at edtechsr.com/links, and we will do our best to put an educational technology spin and lens on the tech news of the past week, or sometimes we'll go back a little bit further. So where shall we begin, host Jason?
Well, since I am located in Montana, I would love to, as reported and I don't even have the link in front of me. This is embarrassing, so I will fill now. As reported on The Verge on January 22nd, 2018, Montana, Big Sky Country, has led the 50 states in putting in a firm stop to the scale back of net neutrality protections that the FCC voted on in December. And part of this is understanding how Montana works and how the Montana situation works. But Governor Steve Bullock, who is the governor of the state of Montana, signed an executive order earlier this week, basically providing net neutrality because of the way Montana is a rural state. So let me explain that. Basically, he said that Montana will only engage in contracts with broadband vendors that recognize net neutrality rules. And because we only have a handful of providers in Montana, we have a couple big players. There's Major Telecom in Montana, CenturyLink that does DSL. We have basically one cable provider. It's Spectrum that provides a cable-based Wi-Fi. We have a lot of rural co-ops, but my guess is there's not a single provider in the state of Montana that doesn't have and probably relies upon a state of Montana contract in some way, shape, or form. And all those will now need to comply with net neutrality rules, which makes Montana effectively the first state in the nation to firmly protect net neutrality as part of policy. So now a couple things about this to start with. First, the reason why this is even possible is because our governor was able to use a state contract to do that. I think we'd have a harder time doing that if we were in a state that had multiple competitors where the state was not a primary customer for some of the more critical pieces of that. So that's one of the reasons why that's possible here. But it's very exciting, especially since I am from I guess probably a politely described purple state. We have a large block of red voters. We have a few statewide blue elected officials. But I think generally speaking in Montana, we've been a fan of maintaining net neutrality, especially since we have such a low diversity in the amount of Wi-Fi and broadband providers here in the state. So I'm incredibly excited that my internet will be protected, and I think that's something that's really to be celebrated. So Wes, any sign of Oklahoma jumping in to save net neutrality in your state?
I have not heard any rumors. I am really, of course, curious to follow this. Never before, I think, have you shared an article to open up an episode with as much pride, just sort of, bursting forth from your voice. So there you go. With tie on and appropriate fleece vest, he is definitely, this is a very good thing. That article, which I did take a look at before the show, indicated the states' rights issue, which is going to be raised because the FCC has attempted to preempt these kinds of state actions by saying, no, states, you cannot do that. And as we'll all recall, you can probably help me, Jason, isn't it the 10th Amendment, which reserves rights not specifically given to the federal government. Those are reserved for the states. And I'll enjoy reading the briefs on this, where they're going to try and attempt to say, they'll do interstate commerce, I'm sure, because the ability to regulate interstate commerce is something that is addressed in the Constitution. But it's a huge issue. So I'm glad to see states stepping up for this. We have lots of criticism for states and cities, really, for sanctuary cities and the ways in which folks are attempting to resist federal mandates around the issues of immigration. And I think that what we really need is for Congress to act. And ultimately, that is what, will enshrine the values of net neutrality, in the legal code. And as we talked about on the show before, not leave it up to elected officials on the FCC who, can come and go as administrations change. But kudos to Montana, and we'll have to watch and see what happens next. I don't anticipate our government, which is highly conservative and probably supportive of all things Trump in terms of the aggregate decisions of the governor's office as well as the state house doing anything like this. But who knows? It can be a crazy time, and we may see some individual legislators in other places see this example and propose some things.
Sure. I want to know one other piece of this that's also, I think, critical, is to understand that Montana is a very rural state. And sometimes our former superintendent of public instruction, Denise Juneau, who served 2 terms and recently termed out of that office, one of the things she used to talk about is that it's not even rural, it's rural and a frontier state, she described us as. And one of the things I think Montana struggled with in dealing with DC bureaucrats and all of our politicians, Democrats and Republicans, have to explain this, is that the rural nature of Montana is a little hard to wrap your brain around until you understand that when we say rural, we're not talking about a town with 22,000 people. We're talking about a town with 22 people. And that's something that is very different than a lot of areas where there are large, mega cities that may have rural areas in them, where suburbs or something that's 20 minutes away from a downtown large city. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about cities and towns and really villages that are 2.5 hours from a major medical center by car, 2 hours from a major grocery store by car, 5 hours from a major grocery store. And to give a sense of the sheer size, and this is a statistic I like to talk about, my partner in crime at the Digital Academy is Mike Agustinelli. We're talking about making a car trip to the far northeastern part of Montana. One of the towns we're looking at is Wolf Point, Montana, which is an 8-hour car ride from Missoula. And if I took off in the other direction and drove 8 hours, I'd be in Seattle, Washington, right? And so, Seattle is closer to me as a drive than Wolf Point is in the other direction. Montana is a very large state. We have a very rural population. And so when there is, net neutrality repealed and there isn't a diversity or choice in the market of broadband providers, that makes a really huge difference for small rural telephone co-ops who I believe are doing really important work, but there's no market for that. They're in a lot of cases doing that just out of the goodness of serving the community as opposed to a real profit motive. So interesting discovery, and we'll see if other states jump on board Montana. So, Wes, any other geographically based news we could talk about today?
Well, let's see. Boy, there's so much. We could almost just do a speed round for the entire show. Let's do a Hawaiian story, shall we? As I think, hopefully, a lot of us realize there was a tremendous blunder this last week, or was it 2 weeks ago, in Hawaii, when the government sent out a false warning that there was an imminent missile attack inbound that was not a drill. And Amy Burvall, who, if you don't follow Amy on Twitter, is an amazing educator and creative, is one person. I actually have some relatives also that I know in Hawaii, but Amy has posted some on Facebook about this. This was the real deal, according to what people thought, because just like you get an Amber Alert on your phone, they received this message: incoming, ICBM nuclear missile attack or whatever. This is not a drill. And it took 43 minutes for them to issue the correction, I guess, because they had permission from FEMA to warn people, but not to correct their mistakes. And so there was an individual who actually was supposed to be doing a test. He had to, click on this is the real thing and then confirm it. There wasn't any two-factor like with another person. I guess I'm sure the U.S. Air Force, when the chief executive of our country, they have this football, right, they carry and they can launch nuclear, it has to be verified. So anyway, it really showed a lot of things that perhaps need to be addressed. But this article, which comes from The Verge on January 23rd, says Hawaii governor forgot Twitter password during false missile alert crisis. And so, unable to log into Twitter, they couldn't alert people. Some folks did use Twitter and find out, sooner than 43 minutes later that this was not correct. It was a mistake, and there wasn't an incoming missile attack. So, Jason, anything you've heard or seen or experienced similar to this in terms of a fake, public disaster announcement? I don't think I've heard of something quite on this scale before.
No, the only thing that I can think of that's even close is there's been some, they're not even false, they're just kind of jumping the gun Amber Alerts. And I did have a very surreal experience last year where I was sitting in the Student Union building in the University of Montana when an Amber Alert came over, and basically it hit, there's probably 1,000 students, members of the public, faculty, staff in this large area where people are eating lunch, and the Amber Alert hit within the same 10 seconds. And it was this completely surreal moment where everyone grabs their phone, all the notifications are going off. And then it turns out it wasn't a false alarm. It just wasn't entirely accurate, and they had to repeal and send a new one out moments later. That's the closest I've been to that. I think what's really interesting about this story is, obviously scary implications, and that's something that we need to be thinking about. But there's been a lot of interesting media after the fact about a couple of different pieces. First, there's a security angle. I was looking for this article and I couldn't find it. Apparently, one of the pictures posted post story was a picture of one of the systems that was in play here that wasn't very well designed, and the password for one of those systems was posted on a sticky note on the monitor, which for those of you that are Silicon Valley show fans know that that's a kind of a funny gag from a couple seasons ago, that someone had posted their password on a sticky note on their monitor. By the way, don't do that. That's terrible, terrible security. The other piece that's also interesting was that they've posted a number of screenshots of the system at play, and apparently the all clear button and the unbelievable disaster button are like right next to each other, and it was easy basically to click on the incoming ballistic missile button as opposed to the all is well in the world button. And so a lot of time, a lot of media around design thinking. That's a topic that's starting to become kind of buzzwordy in K-12 education, and maybe more specifically in EdTech. But design does matter, and I obsess about this a little bit because of my day job. But design systems that let you make the right decisions, design systems that let you learn in an easy pathway, systems that are not foolproof per se, but give you the power to do what you intend to do as the end user is incredibly important. So for the record, don't post your password on your monitor with a sticky note. And if you are if you've won a high office in your state, know your Twitter password. That's good advice, whether you are the Twitter-in-chief in the United States or you're just a lowly governor. So don't forget your Twitter password.
And I think an educational lens on this is the whole idea of being connected. I'm hearing a whole lot, because I'm listening to Note to Self and some other podcasts, about the negatives of being connected, and people are talking about going off Facebook and, just how terribly addictive social media can be. And I think it is important to recognize that, but we need to be, using these tools with intentionality, with balance and limits, and for the good. And so wouldn't it have been nice if you were sitting in a Hawaii classroom to be able to be on Twitter? And, if you had crying students, I heard news reports of kids who were with their parents, and they thought their lives were over. I think they have like 15 minutes or something warning if it's a North Korean ballistic missile attack. being able to have access to other kinds of information, and also trusted sources, right? Because this is, certainly a case where you're going to want to trust the authority. This is coming over official lines, but this is a teachable moment for everybody thinking about, what are we going to do? I mean, hopefully, people, I don't know of anybody who had a heart attack, hopefully, or, somebody who really suffered severely. But, when I was just telling my daughter tonight, I'll preview my Geek of the Week, which has to do with this. The stock crash in 29, right? There were people who jumped out of buildings and did really dramatic things. So anyway, we always need to be thinking about the validity of information and being able to check our sources and having other trusted sources. So yay, there's another plug for being a connected educator, which I would say is a spin on the lessons learned here.
There you go. Well, Wes, let's move to some Google news because we have about 95 different pieces of it today. So I posted this last week, and I want to kind of follow up on it because I think it's actually has impacted me in the past. 9 to 5 Google reported a couple of different articles about that Google is reporting that Google devices on certain networks run by certain Wi-Fi routers are overwhelming the network and essentially causing the networks to go down. And so for those of you that are week-to-week followers may have noticed that about a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago, I was complaining an awful lot about my terrible Wi-Fi situation. I replaced a router, and then I replaced it again with Google cloud routers, which has been actually a good plus for me. But as it turns out, people with Google Homes check and people with Google Chromecast check have overwhelmed some routers because the firmware on those devices was set to send a massive burst of information back to Mother Google as part of a startup routine when that device first gained a Wi-Fi connection. And so that, I think, explains my instances where there were times when it seemed like my internet connection didn't work at all, and a reset of the Wi-Fi router seemed to make a difference. And apparently they're issuing firmware patches for that. So interesting piece. The part I keep thinking about regarding this, chances are you're not using consumer level Wi-Fi technology at school. At least I hope you're not, that you're using good, solid enterprise level Wi-Fi hardware in your school, wherever you're at. But I do think a lot of strange things happen with home networking products, and I don't think a lot of people, and I would include me in this because the extent of my troubleshooting was unplugging it and plugging it back in again. I have a little bit of network training. I was at one point a Cisco certified technician to teach a Cisco class, and I don't know much more than that, right? And I think that's something that is kind of interesting, and that as we start to get large numbers of devices, and in fact tonight I wanted to count so I could report this. I have 24 devices tonight on my Wi-Fi network that are live and working. And the reason why that's the case is that we have a guest in our home tonight. We have our kiddo, the exchange student that's living in our home, who has a number of net-connected devices. My wife and I do as well. And we have a prolific number of Internet of Things devices that are starting to grow in our network. And imagine for a moment if even one of those with bad firmware did what these high-quality Google items did and just overwhelm a router so it shut down. So something to think about, and definitely that wasn't what I thought the cause would be, but it turns out it was probably Google hardware. So Wes, did you check how many devices do you have on your router tonight?
Yeah, I'm looking right now. I don't know if it shows live. I mean, I don't know if this is probably not viewable, but I mean, this is the scrolling screen of all the devices. Our Circle Go will record everything that has connected. And actually, when a new device, my wife is out of town, and so she got the text alert saying that a new device had connected, and anyway, I was like, yeah, that's this laptop I brought from school. So I don't know. It's going to be a crazy number. I'll have to get back with you. I think I can log into my airport router, and it'll give me a live number. But I'm actually hoping to make a switch first off on a cable modem to go to the next level that'll actually go up to 300 megabits per second or whatever. But then also look at a switch on the access point side. Shout outs to Peggy George and Jamie Camp, who are here in our chat room. Yay, from Arizona and from Texas. And please let us know if there are particular articles you all would like to see covered. One of the things, I was trying to do this in OneNote, but I've done this a few times on the show where I'll take a screenshot on my iPad and then mark out articles just to kind of keep track of what we talk about and what we don't. There's so much, but let's keep the Google discussion going. I'll do a little speed round of a couple. Fortune magazine, January 16th, Google launches new IT course, offers access to jobs and scholarships. This is a pretty rigorous program. They're saying this is an 8 to 12 month program where you're doing about 8 hours a week. So weeknights, you're about 2 hours a day. That's pretty intense, even in a graduate program, taking 1 or 2 classes, 8 hours, is a lot. But what they're recognizing is that IT is going to continue to be a growth industry. In Google's case and other companies, they're having trouble hiring folks. It's also an area that there are a lot of dollars available. I think they quote $54,000 or something like that as a starting salary, which I would venture to say is probably not the case in Oklahoma, certainly not in education where we are. But it is nationwide. And so exciting that if you've got the passion and the desire, they've also got scholarships available. And this is a opportunity for folks mainly about Windows and Linux systems, but there's also a cybersecurity portion to that. And so connected to that as well is an announcement from Google that they have created a new company. If you haven't seen a TED Talk by Astro Teller, he is the leader of what used to be called Google X and is now, I think, just called X. It's a part of Alphabet, which is the Google, mothership. And they do crazy things that are moonshots, like they're, creating these balloons to try to provide, wireless high-speed internet connectivity all over the planet in rural areas, and, contact lenses that are going to be able to measure your blood sugar level, perhaps, and other kinds of things. But this is cybersecurity. And so they have spun off a new company, and there's a blog post that Astro Teller put out on Twitter, and then the company did as well. And it is called the Chronicle. And so Chronicle SEC is to attack cybersecurity, and they're going to be using artificial intelligence and machine learning. We hear those terms being kicked around a whole lot. But when it comes to Google, you can have confidence they're not kidding and they're really using it. And so they're saying that a lot of the, challenges that we face as IT professionals when it comes to cybersecurity is there's just so much going on, and you're, potentially, putting Band-Aids and trying to fix problems after they've happened. But there are telltale signs of intrusions and things like that happening on your network. So I'm really excited because I think, much like Chrome and the Chrome OS has been a fresh look at operating systems and a design from scratch. We've talked on the show about, how Leo Laporte and others on the Twit network say, hey, you may not want to run your old, antivirus, anti-malware, because these programs may cause more problems than they solve, and they actually might open you up to things. We talked last week, I think, about Kaspersky, how it basically has an inventory of every single file on your computer. And so whether or not the Kaspersky company was in collusions with the Russian government, it appears clear from what the CIA has let out that program was used to lift secret documents and classified material from the laptops of different U.S. employees and in other places as well. So I think both of those are pretty exciting. And Jason, I guess I'd segue to your day job. Are you guys doing things as far as IT professional, preparation, or is that not on the elective palette of the Montana Digital Academy right now?
It's not there yet. It's a conversation we have quite a lot in context of other state virtual schools that we work with. Montana's a member of the Virtual Learning Leadership Alliance, which is a group of state virtual schools that talk about these kinds of topics. And we want to go in this direction. Part of the problem, though, is that cybersecurity as a technology course is a relatively advanced technology course, so you can't really jump into cybersecurity and the kind of things that you could teach that be on the more the technical end of that until you have some precursors. And so we're kind of working on building those pieces. But it's an important piece, and I think I'm glad to hear that Google's going in this direction. In fact, we keep a close eye on this, because if they start doing things like they're known to do, like release curriculum objects, that might be an opportunity for us to take some of those and use that to help create a sustainable course that's updated related to cybersecurity. But I think, yeah, it's definitely a direction we'd like to go into. And, you know, I do think there's a lot of room for it. And it's always really interesting to me. Google has shifted so dramatically in the last 20 years. It used to be they were hiring, you know, Ivy League four-pointers, right? That was what a lot of the early days at Google, they were focusing on kids that have successful track records at companies, track records in education, and then bringing them in to be part of the company. And now they've evolved just a little bit, and are trying to kind of prime the pump for people to take, you know, something outside of the traditional mainstream of education and get them certifications for the purpose of kind of growing that cognizance and that workforce. And, you know, like a lot of technical and scientific jobs, you know, we're just not keeping up at this point in the pipeline. And so I think, you know, whatever we can do to, you know, get that, you know, to be part of the conversation, right, to get people in that direction, I think it's an important piece for us.
Let's talk a little laptop stuff, which I guess might be Chrome as well as Microsoft. But under the Microsoft heading today, on our links, Verge from January 22nd, Microsoft challenges Chromebooks with $189 Windows 10 laptops for schools. And then over on the Chromebook world, we've got the Chrome Unboxed January 22nd. Lenovo expands educational Chromebook lineup, and Acer announced a new Chromebox and 2 new Chromebooks. Anything exciting here, Jason? And do you think Microsoft has a chance of edging into the Chrome market share of education?
Well, there's 2 things I pulled from these articles. The first one is on the Chromebook side. It was very interesting to me that there are companies that are starting to release new Chromebooks this year. Happens every year. But the one statistic, excuse me, there that I thought was so interesting was that many of the educational Chromebooks are going to be available with 8 GB RAM options. And that's something that was unheard of in the education Chromebooks. Now, I'm using a Chromebook Pixel that has 8 GB of RAM. That's a relatively high-end Chromebook. I do have a couple of old laptops that have 8 GB of RAM that I'm using Cloud Ready by Neverware that creates a Chromium OS experience. But I found that 8 GB of RAM is actually a really important piece to being a power user on a Chromebook. So I was very excited to hear that those Chromebooks are starting to kind of edge into, you know, more higher end specs. A lot of them still have relatively low resolution screens. They're using relatively medium or low end Intel or ARM chips, mostly for battery life reasons, I'm assuming, and also expense. But it's really great to see that they're going to the direction of offering some higher end specs. That said, the Microsoft article is interesting for a different reason, because I'm not surprised that Microsoft is attempting to go after Chromebooks with you know, sub $200 offerings. The question I always have, however, is Windows 10 a usable experience with a $189 laptop? And the part that I thought was so interesting about the Microsoft announcement is that they never mentioned Windows 10s even once in that article, which is Microsoft's supposed Chrome OS killer, where they're creating both a great experience for IT professionals to set up Windows 10 S devices, and also creating secure and scale back solutions that work well on lower end hardware. And the fact that that wasn't mentioned at all in the article, I think, is an interesting sign. So I still, you know, I can be okay on a cheap device. I think I generally prefer older devices that maybe at one point were super premium that are cheaper now because they're dated over a newer device that has a slow chip that's cheap. It's intended to be mass market, but you know, there seems to be a race to the bottom, and I don't think that that has led Microsoft in the right direction in the past. So it'll be interesting to see where schools go with this. So, Wes, are you in the market for any $189 laptops as an IT director?
You know, the dream of a one-to-one device that is very affordable and very powerful has been, I think, on the minds of lots of us in education for a long time. I don't remember what year at ISTE it was where Nicholas Negroponte was there with the OLPC. I think it was maybe even back in 2009 when I first laid hands on one of those at a COSN conference in DC. And actually shout out to Mark Allness up in Seattle, who was one of the first people to buy one of those and play with them. And you know, it was very logo-like in its capabilities. It's certainly nothing that we're going to be, you know, getting kids excited about today who want to watch YouTube videos and be on Instagram. But I think we are continuing to you know, just see the effect of Moore's law on computing and the idea that, you know, we're already, our minds should be, especially if we remember the sound of a dial-up modem, you know, really blown by the capabilities. And, you know, watch a Ray Kurzweil, you know, TED Talk or video on YouTube talking about singularity, because we are in the elbow of the exponential growth when it comes to this stuff. And so what it means practically, you know, for schools is that we don't need to buy a very expensive, you know, top of the line laptop to do some really compelling things, not some just basic things, but some really compelling things. And I won't go so far as, you know, perhaps Gary Steger or others might do, as we keep on telegraphing, we'll do a Chromebook show later, you know, to say, hey, everybody needs to just have a Raspberry Pi and then you can, you know, write your own code, do all of your own stuff. I mean, you can do that. But yes, for a couple $100, it's pretty incredible what you can do, especially when you look at the cost of curriculum. And this is a conversation that I'm continuing to try and catalyze at our school, where it's not just about a device, but it's also about, well, number one, what do you want to do instructionally? Where are your materials? I mean, I need to get a backpack, you know, backpacking, you know, backpack weigher, or that's not the word for it, but scale, where you can, you know, put your backpack on the hook like you do at Philmont and other places when you're hitting the trail. And you know, my daughter in 8th grade, her backpack, I'm sure, was over 50 pounds yesterday coming home. And so anyway, there's different sides of this, but I think it's hugely relevant. And it's also tied to this idea of, will we reinvent the operating system and create, you know, solutions that are very readily manageable, and we can just blow them away with a power wash. And so I think, Jason, you might have put this one in. Maybe I did, but the Google Fuchsia, did you do that one, the 9 to 5?
I did. Yeah, I did.
So 9 to 5 Google, January 23rd. What is Google's Fuchsia OS anyway, and why does it matter for schools, Jason?
Well, so there is I think we mentioned this maybe when this was first released, but Google has been working on, and it's not even in secret. You can go download the operating system on an open source, I think a GitHub open source page, but Google's been working on an operating system called Fuchsia OS, which is not Chrome OS and it's not Android, but in fact, the operating system seems to be built to be used on both. And the reason why I wanted to mention this is because Fuchsia now works on the Chromebook, or I'm sorry, the Chrome Pixel Book, which is the Google current generation of the high-end Chromebooks that they sell. And it also apparently works on at least 1 or 2 phones. And people are downloading the software and installing it, and it crashes all the time. It's not very functional, but there is a couple things that are really interesting about it. One of them is that it seems to put the Google Assistant interface, and for those of you unaware of the Android universe, Google Assistant is essentially the Google voice control that has kind of a lot of things built into it. It's what also runs the Google Home as well. But the Google Assistant seems to be front and center in the operating system. Now, that's very interesting to me as an education researcher, because I am studying intelligent personal assistants as part of my graduate research at the University of Montana. But it's also interesting that Google seems to be interested in something that may be either an alternative or a successor to their split OSs, right? There's Android on mobile, there's Chrome OS on laptop, and 2-in-1 experiences, and they seem to maybe wanting to hedge their bet somewhere in the middle. And since, you know, Android has never really been an accepted tablet experience, even though I have owned an Android tablet that was just fine. I felt like it was a usable item. It appears that Google is attempting to create something there. So does that have an interest to you as an end user, Wes?
Yeah, absolutely it does. I mean, but probably in a future iteration, right? I'm not gonna. I have played, and I think this is a good thing because we learn as we play. With different distributions of Linux and seeing what Ubuntu can do. Shout out to Miguel Gulen, who was one of the people that kind of got me into that. And it's powerful and impressive, and there's a lot of important things that we need to know as IT professionals, and especially if you're going to work in the realm of cybersecurity, about Linux. Linux is such an important part of the landscape, but I don't know that we're going to be running Linux in 100 years. And so folks who are reinventing and looking at how operating system kernels can be recreated, those are seismic changes. When Mac or Apple moved from OS 9 to the Linux kernel with OS 10, I mean, that was huge, and it meant changes for all the software and everything that runs on it. But it's great to see multiple companies taking a stab at this, and so this isn't something that I'm going to rush out to join. In the chat room, I commented to Jamie that it's about cloud management as well as the prices, right? So it's good to see, I think, Windows and Microsoft moving into that, but they've got a lot to prove as far as Microsoft and Apple does as well. I think in terms of, can you offer not only products but management tools that really facilitate, in some cases, basic things like I want to share a printer, or I want to give students access to certain tools and certain capabilities, and limit others. The mobile device management is something that Apple has continued to push off to other companies. I don't see that changing. And so I'm not aware of what Microsoft is doing on that front. I'm sure we could check in with Miguel and others. But anyway, it's of interest, but not something that I think is going to affect our IT budget, this year for sure. And we'll just have to see kind of what happens.
Sure. Absolutely. So.
A couple other headlines, and I'd like to maybe talk some Apple stuff, and then also, and we'll go back to this YouTube stuff, because at the top of our show notes, we got quite a bit of stuff on YouTube changes that we'd like to touch on. So Google teased their I/O event with pictures of a pineapple cake and a series of riddles. That was in The Verge on January 24th. And the article says, I guess if you will go through the riddles, May 8th to the 10th in Mountain View. And Jason, it's not going to work, I'm sure, this year, but let's put that on our bucket list. Wouldn't it be fun, seriously, for you and I to meet at Google I/O? And we could go to an Apple event, we could go to a Microsoft or Amazon event, but I think we have a lot of shared affinity for Google, and it would be quite fun to have a live EdTech SR from the Google I/O Ground Zero. And the other thing I want to mention, Google is also under the security headline. This is The Verge on January 23rd. Over 90% of Gmail users still don't use two-factor authentication. So I shared a presentation with our faculty at a meeting. I had 5 or 10 minutes, but it was really thanking everybody for the transition to two-factor, because as of Christmas, 100% of our faculty staff on our Google domain are using two-step. And, normally when you hear something like this, you're different than 98% of the people out there. You might wonder, am I doing the wrong thing? But I truly believe that proactive organizations as well as individuals are going to continue to utilize two-factor authentication, unique and complex passwords, password managers. That's a really important part of being safe. So those were a couple other headlines. Would you like to take us into some Apple articles? We got a few different things under that headline tonight.
Sure. So to go back to a story reported on a couple of weeks ago, The Verge is reporting that Apple is saying that they will be allowing users to toggle the battery saving feature that was of all the controversy a few weeks ago when it was discovered that Apple was using recent versions of the iOS software on its iPhones to scale back the speed of those phones in order to conserve battery life. And I believe that I said that night when we announced this that if Apple had just put a toggle switch in the settings, this would have not been a big deal. As it turns out, that's exactly what Apple is doing. They're allowing this to be a setting where you can choose to prefer battery life or you can prefer speed of the phone. And so I think this is the smart move on Apple. They will continue to face large lawsuits. In fact, I think I've seen a couple of articles suggesting that there are a number of class action lawsuits by Apple users to sue Apple over this. I don't personally see the need for that because I feel like that they're making good on it by offering battery replacements and now fixing the software to give you a choice. But that is something that we reported on earlier, that there is a follow-up.
There's also some news out of Apple with regard to HomePod, and this relates to home assistants, and it might be interesting for us to tell about our latest adventures. Jason, as the listeners of the show know, is one of those folks that has the Amazon Miss A, and also our lovely Mrs. G, or as of this last week, you can change the voice of your Google Assistant now. They don't say it's male, it's an androgynous name or voice. It sounds pretty male to me, but anyway, you can change that. I was able to change it verbally, but I can't verbally change it back to the female, and then I couldn't find the setting in Home where you can set that. I just need to spend a little bit more time. But on the Apple front, Apple has announced that you can order your HomePod, which is their premium level speaker that's going to have Siri built in, and that can be at your house, I guess, as of February 9th. So the orders are going to start. And Tim Cook, according to Fortune, on January 24th, explains why you'll want the HomePod. And the main reason is audio fidelity. You're going to love the quality that you're going to get for $350. So, Jason, the big question for you is, you already have Miss A, you've already got the Google Assistant. Will the HomePod be making a visit so that you can truly, give us the lowdown on comparing these three digital assistants?
Well, I mean, it may make me the most ridiculous person on earth. I'm already a candidate for that, to be honest, with the sheer number of laptops I go through. But I am only interested from the standpoint that, generally speaking, when Apple promises a good audio experience, they're not joking. Right. And that's one of the reasons why I was so excited when they purchased Beats, is because Beats were a disappointing audio quality purchase for me. In fact, at one point I bought a pair of Beats and returned them because I just didn't understand the desire to own them, because I didn't really hear much different. But my understanding, since Apple's acquired that company, that the audio files have taken back to Beats as being a better quality than they have been in the past. So only from that standpoint, and again, I'm not really an audiophile, am I potentially interested in that particular item. So I know, Wes, you at home have gone in with the Google Home Minis. Will a HomePod be part of your future purchases?
I don't think so. And I really think that, I mentioned this before, Apple is losing the race with AI.
Yes.
I tweeted an article, which I didn't put in the show notes, about the iPhone is dead. And of course you hear these things that, people want to have everyone read that. But this person has switched, back and forth between iPhone and Android several times. And, they've had bad experiences with Apple Care and other things. But the smart assistant, right? If we're living, as Sundar Pichai says, in the age of AI, we've left the mobile, what is he called? Mobile first world behind, and now it's an AI first world. What you buy and the ecosystem you invest in, could have some ripple effects. And there are going to be outliers, as I will say, Jason, I think you are, who are going to invest in more than one, but probably most families are just going to invest in a single one, not multiple. So I don't think so. I mean, one of the main things that had the appeal, I mentioned this before, the broadcast feature and then the simultaneous streaming. Interestingly, you can't stream podcasts yet with Google Assistant in multiple rooms. You stream Pandora or your Google Play Music, but you can't stream your briefing or these podcasts. But the fact that it was $30 a piece and we can have them in multiple rooms, that's a huge deal. And so would I love to have an incredible audio experience? Yeah, I guess. But it's a bigger deal for me to be able to have it in 4 different places in the house, and then as we're liking it, thinking, I think I might like one of those in this bedroom or somewhere else. So don't think I'm going to be doing that. I do want to say though, Verge had an article on January the 23rd. iPhone users can now ask Siri to read daily news podcasts, and that's something that Google Assistant folks, and I think probably Miss A can do that too, as far as news briefs. I've enjoyed going into my Home app, which you can actually do on iOS or on Android, and then you can reorder the news feeds that you're getting. So, like NPR News is by default, but there's different tech news sources, and I've, kind of played around with that. And just as you can have a wonderful serendipitous go down the rabbit hole moment where you hear something or read something and then you get a little bit more information, I have had my own learning landscape enhanced positively by the fact that I'm hearing this different show, a BBC, Tech News Minute, a different Twit Tech News shorter show than the regular Twit, and so it's been good. So what's the update on the Nifer Home digital assistant world, Jason? Anything new that you all are asking your devices, and any new differentiators that you have? Because I'm sure we have thousands with bated breath, just on the edge of buying, and they might, as I did, just go with your advice and have something push them over the edge one way or the other.
I did try something with the Internet of Things world that honestly I don't understand. And so I did buy a smart light bulb. It was on sale a couple of weeks ago. I will say it's not one of the super multicolored ones. It's just a white light bulb that you screw in, you hook it up to your Wi-Fi network, and then you can turn it on and off and then do different brightness with it. But this bulb had amazing reviews on Amazon, and I just don't understand the point. Like, I just don't get why, it is kind of nice to have the ability to dim that light, right? And you could buy multiple light bulbs and then, set up different scripts and stuff that make some light and some dark, or make them all dim, or, hook that to other things. Like you could turn them on like in a vacation mode, for example. And those are all kind of interesting, but I just like it hooked up to both the Divine Miss A and the Google Home, and I just don't understand the lure. So it's maybe a nerd too far for me, but I don't get it.
Okay. Well, a couple other things, and then let's jump into these YouTube articles. Apple is adding a new privacy icon to iOS and macOS to prevent iCloud password phishing. This was The Verge today on January 24th. I think that's a good thing. We can have, two-step verification and complex passwords, but if we're clicking things that we shouldn't click, if we're being tricked, these kinds of pop-up messages have been happening in browsers for a while, and some of them, you've been hacked, click here to get help, and then, it delivers the malware package when you click on what you are guessing is actually an assistance link to software. So there was a software engineer, I think, that recently demonstrated, according to the article, how easy it is for an app developer to do this, to have a pop-up that looks like iCloud. Apple tends to police its app store, better than Google does with the Play Store. We've had several different security articles in the last few weeks about, in some cases, I think this was last week, right? Hundreds of thousands of downloads of some malicious software and Chrome extensions that, were actually doing bad things. So glad to see Apple doing that. Again, Apple is really planting its flag in privacy. And when we see the next Apple event, I would bet they're going to continue that, because, that is a way they differentiate themselves in the marketplace from Google and from Amazon. But the race to AI, and with machine learning powering the stuff, it's data. And so if you're letting everyone just be siloed and you're not gathering their information and their data and then hopefully using it for good to make your products better and to improve your AI and your machine learning developed services, I think you're going to, in the big scheme of things, lose the race. But I've been wrong before, and I could be wrong here. So you want to jump us into some of these YouTube articles, Jason, because there's several different things here. And Ben Wilkoff had reached out to us last week or the week before, talking a little bit about the educational implications of this.
Yeah, so the one that I think has gotten the most attention, and one thing that seems to be true right now is that YouTube seems to be kind of at war with its content creators. And I don't think it's all content creators, and I don't think it's all categories of content creators, but YouTube seems to have relationship problems with folks that are the ones that are feeding that. And don't get me wrong, I'm sure that a lot of YouTube's bread and butter is big mega corporations that utilize the YouTube platform to serve up, music videos that have 3 million hits and entertainment that or entertainment properties that are releasing pieces that get hundreds of thousands of hits in 24 hours. But YouTube has announced that they're going to be tightening rules about which channels they're going to be able to monetize. And if my memory serves me correctly, that you need to essentially have at least 1,000 subscribers, and I believe the number was 4,000 hours of watching annually. So in other words, you need to have subscribers and traffic to be able to monetize your channel. And it's interesting to me for a number of reasons, but it seems like that small operators with maybe niche channels are going to get squeezed out of the monetizing, even though, let's be honest, if you have less than 4,000 hours of views a year and less than 1,000 subscribers, there's a pretty good chance you're not making mega bucks on the monetization of that video. But still, the fact that they seem to be setting this bar so that they can, I think, aim at, bad actors in this space. They seem to be wanting to do that. So first, let's be clear. This also counts out the EdTech Situation Room YouTube channel, a popular destination for all teachers everywhere from going to monetizing. And while it's not a big deal, right? Wes and I are clearly not doing this for the money. At the same time, if for some reason episodes or perhaps the channel caught fire a little bit, for us to have to get to a point where we have 1,000 subscribers to monetize seems a little punishing for me for being a small content creator.
It does, and I think we ought to talk some more offline, Jason, about advertising, because maybe this year it might be fun for us to dabble with either a company that will find ads that we read on the show, or think about joining the Twit network or joining somewhere. I mean, there's a lot of possibilities here around the ways in which things get amplified. What I'd like to comment on, and then I want to talk specifically about this Logan Paul article and pranking culture and this stuff. This ties to what we discussed last week with Facebook making changes to their news feed and addressing issues that were tied to the election, right? Before Christmas, we had Silicon Valley representatives, not CEOs, but basically the lawyers and I think PR communications people appearing before, I think, both Senate and House. I know there were Senate committees testifying about what happened, what went wrong, what they're doing. And so Silicon Valley wants to avoid government regulation, which is going to at worst, really hamstring and harm, innovation and also profits, of course, of what they're trying to do with different kinds of digital platforms. But also, I think there's a genuine sense that we want these tools to improve our lives and not make them worse. We don't want our democracy subverted. We also don't want, stories like what happened with Logan Paul. So this is from the Vox on January the 3rd. The article is titled "Logan Paul and the Toxic YouTube Prank Culture That Created Him Explained." And I would wager, and I'm not a betting guy, so I'm not going to do this for real, but if I was to bet, if you're to walk into any high school classroom today and you're to say, hey, do you guys know who Logan Paul is? And about, the suicide video in Japan, I am almost 100% sure that you're going to have over 50% of the kids raising their hands. Yeah, I know about that. And similarly, if you were to walk into a faculty meeting of teachers today and say, hey, how many of you know about Logan Paul? I bet this is a situation where there's a big disconnect between younger generation and older generation. And so pranking culture on YouTube is actually, I think, a topic ripe for digital citizenship discussion, because probably similar to pornography. If you're watching it and if you're liking it and you're sharing it, you're contributing to it. And there are I think adults who've been now charged, thankfully, with crimes on things that they've done to their children. And when you're pranking someone, there's a line somewhere where it goes too far. And so Logan Paul is a very popular YouTuber who was in Japan, was in this forest and saw a person's dead body hanging who had committed suicide, shot video of that, was laughing, and said later, I was just trying to deal with the shock. But basically, this violates all of YouTube's terms of service. And he's a very popular YouTuber, and YouTube never took it down. It was actually taken down by him, and it was up almost 24 hours and became one of the top trending videos on YouTube. So this is a very big issue. And so certainly YouTube doesn't want to see this kind of thing making headlines, but they also want to curb fake news and, you know, this idea of people being able to monetize fake news. And so I think that the monetization thing has a lot to do with election and the ways in which things go viral, but it also crosses over into just, you know, YouTube culture, popular culture. So I will admit that I did not know Logan Paul. He has a younger brother who's a real popular YouTuber. My 8th grade daughter's, she's all over this. You know, she knows about this. She's talked about it with her friends. You know, any of this news to you, Jason, or have you been tracking on all this stuff yourself?
I've seen headlines, but I have no idea who Logan Paul is. I mean, I know from the stories, but I mean, I think that's the power and promise and the warning of these platforms, right? Like, first, you know, let's be honest, the YouTube celebrities do make some coin with the YouTube platform, and it's not just the monetization of the channel, it's sponsorships, it's my understanding is if you become one of the super YouTube folks, shocking amounts of free swag shows up at your home on the odd chance that one of those things might be worn or utilized during a video. I mean, there's a really big monetary incentive for people to do, let's be honest, dumb stuff that goes viral, right? Yeah. And I think that's, you know, like in the same way that Wes and I thinks that's empowering, right? Like you can publish to a world audience, right? Like you can share your views on things to the entire world via YouTube. It also has the ability to be abused, and so that goes back to a common theme here: digital citizenship, and needing to be aware of, you know, that not all freedom is used in positive and in constructive ways.
And just as we have students today who want to be, you know, NBA stars or be an NFL, superstar, we've got folks that want to be YouTube stars, and that can be a very positive and constructive thing, but it can also lead to some really stupid decisions. And so in that Vox article, which is the #1 article I'd recommend that I've kind of read on this, here's a quick paragraph. Searching YouTube for prank yields today 33,300,000 results, the most popular of which has over 110 million views. Despite being only the 51st most popular creator on YouTube, according to Social Blade, Logan Paul's monetization of his videos bring him anywhere from $3,000 to a staggering $50,000 per clip.
Yeah.
So that is just like, wow. And so it's a good conversation to have with, you know, what are kids watching? Who are their influencers? And, you know, as students use the platform, it's an opportunity to talk about a lot of different things, not only, you know, what's appropriate and not appropriate and what kinds of things are we you know, filling our minds and our eyes with, but also, you know, to what degree are we, how are we using those tools ourselves? You know, if we're publishing, if we're using our voice, and what are the borders, right? What are the boundaries? Humor is a challenging thing because it's different, but I hope that, and I mentioned this maybe last week or the week before, this digital citizenship site, digcit.us, we're going to end up having some different narrated slideshows that will talk about some of these kinds of timely issues, because we need to have, you know, internet safety, traditional sorts of conversations with students at different levels, but you know, these are things we need to talk about as well, and especially I think the chance to talk with parents and adults. So because of a death in our family and a memorial service that will happen this next weekend, my father-in-law passed away. I've actually changed and moved back a series of presentations that I'll share at our church for parents and grandparents as well as adults and kids. And so it's just going to be moved back a week. But I'm really looking forward to that, looking forward to some conversations similar that we're going to be having at our school. And all of this you know, stuff is educating me and kind of opening my eyes to some stuff that our kids know about, right? And we need to talk with them about.
Absolutely. So anything else on the YouTube front, sir?
Let's just do a quick shout out for Ben Wilkoff. Ben has started a Google Doc called the Educator and Student YouTube 1000 list. And part of the goal there, I think, is basically amplifying educators who are publishing on YouTube and getting the word out about their channels. So you can check that out and see who has been added to the list. Add yourself to the list if you've got a YouTube channel. Let's see, I'll scroll down, and he's got, I guess, 22 folks that are on there. So those are really good YouTube channels to add. And I will do a shout out again to really Apple TV as well as YouTube. One of my favorite things is now looking at my recommended YouTube videos, sometimes on my laptop, but a lot of times at home. I want that bigger screen. And so it's a good thing as you like videos, as you watch them, YouTube is watching you. But in this case, it's a very positive thing because, you know, if you're enjoying videos about AI or about Google or education or whatever your topic, or maybe it's a nice fireplace. We watched some fireplace videos over the holidays, and so it'll make those kinds of suggestions, and that can be really positive. All right, well, would you like to Geek of the Week it? I think it's about that time. I'll say that I took your challenge and used the app, the Arts and Culture app, but I was in Allen, Texas, and Texas and Illinois have different biometric laws, and it was very frustrating because I was like, where is this freaking thing? You know, and it wouldn't pop up to let me take my picture and see what I'm supposed to look like if, you know, my visage is compared to, you know, there you go. There's one of the results. And so I had, after Googling it, I had to download a VPN, activate a free trial, select the VPN in New York, and then my iPad popped up and said, hey, would you like to find out what art matches you? So now that I'm back in Oklahoma and my IP address matches, I haven't even opened it since I got back, I will open it and it pops up. So that is an interesting thing. Yeah, look at that. Search with your selfie pops right up because the Oklahoma IP address is fine for biometrics. Yes, anyway, interesting stuff. What do you got for us this week?
Well, I would like to point out an interesting thing that I've stumbled upon too. Actually, I saw this after the first of the year. There were some references to it, but the New York Times, or a couple of staffers at the New York Times, have started the New York Times Podcast Club. It's a Facebook group, and the reason why it's interesting to me is that not only has it been very useful to me, I've discovered a number of podcasts that I otherwise would not have discovered, but you have to apply to get in. You don't just sign up for it, and the application's simple. You have to name 3 podcasts you listen to, and I think the idea is they want to kind of fish out people that are interesting kind of broadly in the podcast culture, but both staffers and members of the group, and there are thousands of people in this group, and I know a friend of mine here in Montana, she's a very, 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 very big podcast listener, and I sent it to her, and she's already been engaged and commenting up and down the Facebook group. But the New York Times Podcast Club is a place where podcast aficionados go to, you know, find new podcasts, and I'll give you an example of one that I was able to listen to. There's a really great podcast called Nocturnal that's kind of broadly about the night, and I will say the first 3 episodes I listened to were fascinating, including one that in fact I used to kind of do this when I was a person that had summers off, have kind of switched her days and nights around. She preferred to be awake at night. She was more productive at night. And I found that to be familiar to a earlier time in my life. And she was talking about her transition to become, you know, a more daytime person through melatonin and that transition. It was a fascinating story, 45-minute podcast. So the New York Times Podcast Club, I'm linking to the New York Times website on our show notes, but that just takes you to a Facebook group. If you just type in New York Times Podcast Club into the Facebook search, I'm fairly certain you'll be able to find it. But again, it's by acceptance only. You have to apply to get in, although I have to say they let me in, so the bar must be fairly low.
No, they Googled you intently and said, this guy's definitely a geek. So they used their AI technology, which they've been transcribing all our shows, and said, yikes, we got to get him in. So 2 quick Geeks of the Week for me. Actually watched the first one tonight. It's a new PBS American Experience documentary, The Secret of Tuxedo Park. Wow, never knew this. It's basically the story of radar and how that came to be created. I didn't know this, but before the United States had entered the war, Churchill, in kind of a desperate attempt, their scientists said, let's give the Americans all the stuff that we have. And we were not yet able to do microwave transmission, and it was a missing piece as far as radar. And so there's a quote from this documentary that, nuclear weapons ended the war, but radar is the technology that really won the war. And this is really the initiation of big science. And this foreshadows DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, which was created so that the U.S. government wouldn't be surprised by another Pearl Harbor. But man, absolutely fascinating. And it's the story of a guy who reminds me of Bruce Wayne, Batman, but for real, because Alfred Lee Loomis is this guy who uses his fortune that he acquires on the stock market to create his own laboratory, and does some very progressive stuff. He basically discovers/invents the sonogram and that kind of technology, and then has a lead with Roosevelt's science board, and then all this at MIT that's called the RAD lab, and it's the radiation lab. But just absolutely riveting stuff, and a great new documentary. And then the next one, real quickly, is a website, which, Jason, I think if you're not already using it, you'll enjoy. It's called Flixible, and Lifehacker had an article on January 23rd. Flixible helps you find the perfect thing to watch on Netflix, and while it can be great to just see what Netflix suggests, you can do different kinds of filtering by genre, IMDb rating, and other things, dates, and be able to find your new shows. So if anybody listening ends up using that, let us know.
Well, Wes, where can we find you on the internet?
I am on Twitter at W Fryer. My blog, Speed of Creativity, has been a bit dormant, but I find myself actually now tweeting more, links to Google Docs and some things like that than composing full-blown blog posts. But I'm also creating on that digital citizenship website I mentioned for our school, which is digcit.us.
Excellent. And I am on Twitter at TechSavvyTeach. I blog at the NCC Tech Savvy Teacher blog.ncc.org. And as a reminder, the NCC Spring Conference in fabulous Seattle, Washington, registration still open the 14th to the 16th of February 2018, where you can come see me talk about tech stuff. I know you can do that once a week here on the EdTech Situation Room, but if you want to hear about some of the things I'm working on broadly, that's a good place to do that. So this action here is the EdTech Situation Room. We're a once-a-week podcast. We broadcast live at 9 p.m. Central, 8 p.m. Mountain Time, and 3 a.m. UTC for those of you that are in the the Greenwich Mean Time folks. We do broadcast live via YouTube. You can go to our YouTube channel, just type EdTechSR, go to our website, edtechsr.com, or you can download this as a podcast, both at our website, where we have little tiny files available if that's your preference, or you can go to wherever finer podcasts are aggregated, which includes the iTunes Store, Stitcher Radio, Podcast Addict, I found out tonight, has us on their list, and I think they pull from the iTunes list. And of course, your podcast probably has it. And so search for us to find that as soon as those episodes are released. So thank you for tuning in. We hope to see you next week on the EdTech Situation Room, and we hope you have a great week.
Good night, everybody.